Well, good evening and welcome back to the Journey Home program. I'm your host, John Mark Grodi, here on EWTN. And once again, we have this great privilege to come together to hear a story of faith and conversion. We're joined tonight by Jennifer Wood. She's a former Lutheran, and what's your title again at Spiritus?
Director of Formation.
Director of Formation at spiritusministries.org. You can check that out, and we'll talk a little bit more about that ministry later. But Jennifer came into the church in 1998, and we're really honored to have her here tonight to share her story. Jennifer, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Or Jen, I'm sorry.
That's all right.
It's really great to have you here to hear about your story. And we were talking beforehand that, oftentimes we have people on the show, and when we think about what to put on that title card there, former what, right? People have lots of backgrounds. You are dyed-in-the-wool Lutheran growing up, so we're going to hear all about that. But then, we want to talk about your really great ministry that you're involved in as well. So let's go back to the beginning and tell us a little bit about where it all started for you.
Sure. Well, I am dyed-in-the-wool Lutheran. Yeah. I grew up in Keweenaw County, which is the very top of Upper Michigan. Okay. Sticks right up into Lake Superior. Predominantly Finnish. My mother's fully Finnish American. Mm-hmm. I'm 3/4. My dad is Italian. I always say, or he's half Italian. I always say there's a little spice in there. But my grandfather, his father and mother met picking blueberries. And we've always asked, how did that work out with the Catholic Italian and the Finnish woman, and Lutheran, and he says it worked out. So we never got the full story on that.
It just worked out.
It just worked out. But her father, my great-grandfather, was really instrumental in founding my church, which Bethany Lutheran of Keweenaw. And it, again, Finnish Lutheran, we're not all the same. Yeah. Lutherans sometimes get swept into this general broad category, but we're pretty different. Even the Scandinavian groups are different. Okay. By the time I came along, the Finnish Lutheran Church had been absorbed into the Swedish Lutheran Church, the LCA, which then became ELCA when I was a senior in high school. So I was raised in a tradition that I was formed early. My mom was the organist. My dad was really involved in parish council and in other areas of leading the church. He used to teach Sunday school. I always joke that I was raised in liturgy because my mom had an organ in our house and she'd practice. So I could sing. My brother used to sing the liturgy in the shower, but I could sing all of it in various settings, not just one. And just a real appreciation. I was gifted with a pastor in my later elementary years who was pretty high church. So he had chasubles and we had torchbearers and a crucifer, and we'd as kids, we'd get to be altar servers. We looked forward to being able to carry a torch, So that was part of my upbringing. Communion every week, for example, which is not always typical for Lutherans, depending on what expression. Sure. And one of the interesting things that I think happened for me as a child was when I was in kindergarten, we called the first female pastor in the Wisconsin Upper Michigan Synod at the time. Mm-hmm. And I remember asking my father, girls can be pastors? And my dad's answer was, they can now. And I was always kind of intrigued by the now part of that. Right.
And what year was this?
It would have been 1976 or 77.
Okay, it's the 70s. Yeah, gotcha. Okay.
So really early on in the ordination of women in the ELCA. So she was my pastor for, those early elementary years. Mm-hmm. And then I grew up going to church regularly, which isn't every week, which wasn't typical necessarily, a lot of Sunday school drop-offs, and then they'd leave. Yeah. And when I got to confirmation, which wasn't till high school, I was really eager for more. I think I was kind of an unusual high schooler maybe, because I asked good questions, like how does scripture fit together, and why is the earth created in 7 days, and how did that maybe work? And I got great answers. I learned really early on that the early Bible probably had 4 authors, right? And I learned early on that there are 2 creation stories that fit together, but are authored by different individuals, most likely. And so those kind of answers were just so interesting to me and made me kind of want to know more. I also started going to summer camp, which is the first place that I had a more personal relationship with Jesus and learned how our church is about love. I learned Fortune Lake Lutheran Bible Camp is a place of grace. So a lot about how we are blessed, we are infused with grace, how we are, our God is a loving God and he wants a relationship with us. And that came just through the witness of the counselors and some of the content. I eventually started to work there. But going a little bit back to that confirmation, a couple of things happened there that were kind of interesting that I didn't really think about at the time, but now I can see the Lord working maybe in a different way.
Right.
We had the Society of St. John, which is a Byzantine monastery, formed while I was in middle school, high school, up on the tip of the Keweenaw Peninsula. I'll do a shout out for them because they have a place called the Jam Pot and they sell really, really delicious jam from local berries.
I'll have to make a pilgrimage.
Absolutely. And the line is long to get in, but we had one of the original monks come and talk to our confirmation class because our church had helped them build part of their monastery. And I just remember sitting there thinking, this guy has given up everything to live in this really remote place on the lake where the wind howls and there's lots of snow. We're talking, 250 inches or so of snow. And he's even given up marriage. And I couldn't really make sense of that. How could you do that was a question that definitely I kept asking and kind of wrestling with. And he was so at peace and just had such a beautiful witness about the way that they had formed the monastery. And it's been really beautiful over the years to watch it grow from these two guys to a more thriving community. Wow. And they built a skeet, and so
what a neat experience.
Yeah, it was really a neat experience, and really, really great of my pastor to expose us to the Church Catholic, as in little c, Church Universal. And another thing that I took away from that confirmation period was that Lutherans were a reforming movement, which within the Church Catholic. So I came from that branch of Lutheranism. Again, there are a lot of different ways of looking at it. Definitely didn't use the word Protestant. Reforming movement within the Church Catholic is what I took away from my confirmation classes. And besides the small catechism and a lot of memorization. And I've also, that's kind of stuck with me in that really seeing Lutheranism as an improvement on Catholicism, but not allowed back into the main fold after that, those improvements were made. Gotcha. So very, very much, again, not Protestant, but kind of a flowing out of, I would say, a specific branch on the tree.
Yeah.
So that was shortly preceded, though, by a call that I experienced in the balcony of my church. I was at our Sunday liturgy, and I was listening to my pastor preach, and I totally had this sudden sense that I could do that. And I didn't know what to make of it as 14-year-old. Yeah. How do you tell anybody you want to be a pastor? Yeah. People want to be astronauts and physicists and hairdressers. But I didn't know anybody who was willing to say, I want to be a pastor. So I kind of buried that, but it wouldn't go away. And I've since found out as a Catholic that that's a common time for a Cal experience to happen for a young person, right around 14. So it's kind of cool that God did whisper that into my heart. Yeah. So as I went off to college, went to Lutheran College, Augustana in Rock Island, Illinois.
Oh, cool.
And wanted to really have a Lutheran identity in my college education. And through conversations with my pastor and with my camp director, I majored in history, but by my senior year was pretty sure that I was going to go into seminary. Okay. So I began to do those applications, ended up at Luther Seminary in St. Paul, Minnesota, which was different. Most of the people from my area went to Lutheran School of Theology in Chicago. but I really wanted to live in the Twin Cities for some reason and not in Hyde Park. Maybe for my upper Michigan self, Chicago seemed too big. And as I began to study there, I was kind of impressed with my classmates' ability to quote Martin Luther. I could not do that and really had no desire to read all of his works. Maybe that made me different, or maybe it just makes me more practical. I don't know. But I was struggling when we studied Lutheran confessions. I was really struggling with the idea that God saves us through grace, right? And our works are then our joyful response to that salvation, but they don't change us. And I couldn't have articulated that then. I just knew something didn't sit right.
Right.
Well, after my second year, I went out to Montana for a clinical pastoral education summer. And I remember driving across the plains of North Dakota. I had never really left the Northwoods. And I'm driving across the plains of North Dakota, and I'm thinking, oh my God, I cannot hide from you here. And so this real experience of me and the Lord journeying and not being able to bury any of the things that I'd been pondering or thinking about. And also a real sense of, I am called to be in Montana right now, and my parents think I'm crazy because it's so far away, but there's some reason why I'm here. Well, we were a group of 6 in this really small clinical pastoral education. We were doing hospital chaplaincy, and in the hospital in the mornings, and then in class in the afternoons. And there was a guy who was studying for the Catholic priesthood, who was in my CPE group, and we were both in our mid-20s, and we just started to play tennis. In my mind, he was my safe friend. I mean, he was going to be a priest, right? So he was off the dating table, so to speak, and I didn't really think about him beyond, wow, I'm going to have this great summer doing this ministry that I love, and I'm going to get to hang out with this guy who's also doing it, who I don't have to worry about a relationship with, and we can just talk theology and argue with each other about who's right. And our tennis was really fun. I never won. Well, I think I maybe won one game. But he was so fun watching play that I just laugh a lot. And we started to have lunches together, and suddenly we were going to movies, and then we were occasionally having dinner together, and then we'd have dinner more than once. And I was calling my mom to say, I'm hanging out with this guy, and I'm really worried about how I'm feeling about him because he's going to be a priest. And she said, I have so much respect for that calling. You cannot date him, Jen. Back off. And I really tried. But we just had some beautiful conversations. Like, I asked him about the saints, for example. Yeah. And he said, well, we don't pray to saints. We ask saints to pray for us. And don't you ask your mother to pray for you? So why wouldn't you ask the Blessed Mother to pray for you if you know she's in heaven? Well, that made a lot of sense to me. And then at the time, I was pretty pro-choice, not necessarily pro-abortion, but definitely in favor of letting women decide. And he kind of talked me through, well, do you believe if the baby were born, it'd be murder? And I said, well, yeah. And he said, well, how about before? It's still a person. And kind of the aha moment happened where I went, oh, if we legislate against one, we should probably legislate against the other too. So kind of bringing me into consistency. So those were two real hangups I had. He was also very prayerful and young and excited about that. Yeah. He really knew Jesus and wasn't afraid to witness to his own call story and his own, like way back when I met that monk in my confirmation class. Here was a young man who was saying, I will give up my marriage. I will give up what I need to give up in order to serve the Lord. And I was very impressed by that. And, he was kind and fun, and we had a lot of fun just hanging out and goofing around. And I realized one day, I remember I was at Olive Garden and he was sitting across from me and we were talking about who knows what, probably something theological. And I realized like, oh my gosh, this is the perfect guy for me. And then my next thought was, Lord, it figures. He's Catholic. He cannot be the perfect guy for me. I guess I'm supposed to be single and I'll go back to Upper Michigan and be a single pastor. And I have my family and I make friends easy. So I'll just do that because I guess that's what I'm called to since the perfect guy is going to be a priest. Figures. I was also thinking to myself that there's a whole seminary full of Lutheran men. Couldn't one of them been a possibility for me?
What are you doing, Lord? Yeah, what?
Well, what was happening to him at the time is he was really being worked on by the Holy Spirit. And he was discovering that his own plans for his future were maybe not the plans that the Lord had for him. And that was completely outside of my knowledge. I just saw him. I just saw him in front of me, kind of getting a little weird and reflective. But one night we went up to the Rims just to talk because he had been kind of odd. And I was asking him questions. What's going on with you? What's happening? And he said, I thought I was called to be a priest, but I'm discovering that the Lord is working something else in me. And he said, and that has something to do with you. And I was taken aback because in my own mind that summer, I had prepared a really good speech about how summer love happens and it's intense, and especially in a program like this, but it doesn't mean anything. So you just move on with the rest of your life. And I had this, it was a great speech, John Marcus. It was great. But I couldn't say it. So he's sharing how he cares for me and how he's enjoyed our friendship and how maybe he's feeling called to make that into something more. And I'm speechless because my speech won't come out. And then he says to me, oh, I really love you. And I said, really? Which is not the thing you want to say to somebody who's completely bearing his feelings to you. But I could not make sense of it. It was as if I was in a romantic comedy, but I didn't know how it was going to end. At the end of the summer, we did spend more time together, and I don't think I told him I loved him for a while because I was not sure, but we definitely did enjoy time together. He of course talked to his vocation director, worked on his pieces he had to do regarding seminary. I went on to my year-long internship, which was at the time how Lutherans did seminary, 2 years in school, 1 year internship, 1 year in school, which was at the top of Wisconsin in Washburn. And I had blessed with a pastor supervisor who had been Catholic and who was also pretty high church. So I was enjoying being with someone who understood kind of what I was maybe looking at should Lincoln and I decide or discern marriage together. Someone who could really walk with me and form me again in that liturgical tradition that I had grown to love so much. And somebody who was just patient with somebody who was learning. And I loved it. I loved preaching. I loved pastoral care. I loved being with people. I was getting a lot of confirmation that this is where God wanted me. But in January of that year, I went to a funeral with my supervisor. It was for a woman whose father was Catholic. She was a colleague of ours, so a group of us went together. And we started going into the church, and I looked at him and said, what do you do about communion? And he's like, well, if they don't know who I am, I just go. Because we believe in real presence in the Eucharist. As a Lutheran, I had no questions about that. Jesus is in, with, and under the body and blood. And the bread and wine, his body and blood, in, with, and under. And so I didn't see myself as having any belief that's different or differing from Catholicism at that time. Mm-hmm. I didn't understand what it really meant to be in communion. Sure. But the ELCA has open communion, so I figured it was a Catholic problem, not mine. But as we started to move forward for communion, I was in the aisle, moving up. I could see Mary off to the left in her little altar area. I didn't quite know what that was. And I heard a voice, and the voice was, "You have to do this for real." And I thought, what? Who? I looked around. Who's talking to me? I had no idea that you could have God talk to you, but it was a female voice. So that was bizarre. And I got forward. I took a few more steps, and I heard, "You're lying, and you have to do this for real." And by the time I received, I'd heard it. It still makes me cry a little. I heard it 3 times. And I received the Eucharist, and I moved past, and I heard it again. "You were lying. You have to do this for real." Well, at that point, I started to shake as I'm going back to my pew going, how on earth am I have to be a Lutheran pastor. That's exactly what I told Lincoln when he told me he loved me. I have to be a Lutheran pastor. It was so clear to me that that's where God was calling me. But I was having this moment that was sacred, was scary, and I asked the same question Mary did, how can this be? And gosh, she had a lot more at stake to ask that question for than I did. But I went back to my pew and I prayed and I shook and I almost cried, but I tried not to. At least it was a funeral, right? And I then buried it. I didn't tell anybody that happened for 6 months or so. I could not even imagine what that might mean for my life. Again, I was so happy doing my internship work, and I was doing some youth ministry, and I just really loved being Lutheran, the improvement upon Catholicism.
Right.
So yeah, that archaic, as in my mind, that archaic church that doesn't really like women, that is stuck in the past, isn't really something for me. In spite of all the witness that Lincoln, my husband, had given me and offered to me, I still didn't really buy in or see how I could be part of that.
Right.
That picture.
Wow, what an intense experience.
Yes.
So you sat on that for a while, though.
Yes.
Went back to your program?
I did. I finished my internship. We got engaged in July.
Okay.
Of that year, and then I went back into seminary, pondering. I talked to my liaison from our Upper Michigan Synod and said I need to slow down my process. Excuse me. I had 1 year left, and I was supposed to go into approval next. I had to write a paper and meet, and I said I can't do it yet. I have to give myself some time. And I did share with her what had happened, and I said, maybe I'm called to be Catholic. And she was concerned for me, really thought maybe, she was worried I'd be part of a monolithic church. Couldn't quite understand why.
Well, and where, at this time, where was Lincoln's head at? What was he thinking about all this?
I didn't tell him right away. One of the conversations I remember that summer was, I have to let you do this on your own, because I got really excited and I know it might not happen. So I have to let you do this on your own. You discern. I'm here if you need me. Yeah.
All right. Well, maybe that's a good spot for a break.
Yeah.
So we'll come back in just a few minutes and hear the rest of the story. If you go to chnetwork.org/Lutheran, you'll find a collection of stories and resources from former Lutherans like Jennifer. So check that out at chnetwork.org/Lutheran. There's also other denominational backgrounds up there, along with stories just again from every conceivable background. You'd be surprised about the interconnections and the ways they speak to you in your particular journey. So check that out. And like I said, we'll be back in just a couple more minutes to hear the rest of Jen's story. So stay tuned. See you then. Good evening and welcome back to the Journey Home program. We're entering the second half of our hour tonight, speaking with Jennifer Wood. She's a former Lutheran and former Lutheran seminarian.
Yes.
And, we're really enjoying hearing your story tonight, Jen. When we left off, you'd had this really intense experience.
Yes.
At a Catholic funeral, hearing a voice, being confronted with this question of, well, what does communion really mean?
Yes.
What do these differences really mean? Could I become Catholic? What even? So you didn't even really have a mental category file folder for that. And
Nope.
So, we left off and you were processing all that in the midst of seminary, in the midst of your relationship with Lincoln, a lot going on. So let's pick it up there. What happened next? Yeah.
Well, I can assure listeners that after that experience, I did not go to communion in Catholic churches when I went to Mass with my husband, because I was not going to make the Blessed Mother any more angry with me than she already was, apparently. So that was definitely a piece of kind of sorting out that what does it mean to be in communion? And it's more than just my personal belief and about corporate belief and journeying with a particular community together and saying that I am Catholic. And I was not by any means ready to do that. So we were engaged in July and I had to go back to school for my senior year. It was really fortunate that he was at St. Paul Seminary in St. Paul when we met, even though we met in Montana. So we weren't, it was good we had a year where we weren't living in the same city to give us time to discern. And then really nice that we were in the same city as we were preparing for our wedding and then obviously marriage. But that fall, I was of two minds really about it all. I thought, well, maybe I can be Catholic. And then I thought, no, I have all these gifts. How are they going to be used if I leave this church that I love? And put the possibility of ordination aside, honestly.
Right.
I mean, that was a big wrestling piece to humble myself enough to say, I'm not going to be ordained, was a piece of it. Some of my classmates kind of knew what was going on. And while they were in somewhat of a shock, most people don't leave after internship. They're pretty set after that. They were very patient as I swear I was Catholic one day and Lutheran minister the next day. I don't know if it was that fast, but that's kind of how it felt as I look back. But God usually hits me with a 2x4 when I need his direction. And one of the pieces of marrying a very faithful Catholic for someone who came from my tradition was, what are we going to do about planning our family? And that was a stumbling block for me. I'd grown up with a number of Catholics. I had my formerly Catholic grandfather and all these great aunts, and there were big families all around me, but I didn't really know many Catholics who didn't have a lot of children. And while I was open to having children, I didn't want 9. I just didn't see how that would be good for my body or good for my mental health. And I didn't believe there was anything you could do as a Catholic that could help you number your kids in a more planned way. I only knew about rhythm and it didn't work as far as I was concerned. And Lincoln kept telling me, there's other things. I said, no way. No way. If something else worked, everyone would know about it because it'd be free. So I was pretty resistant. And in prayer, though, it became clear that I had to at least explore his point of view. If we were going to be married, I needed to honor his beliefs about it to the point where I could explore it. So I made a deal with God. You shouldn't do that. And Lincoln. And I said, okay, I'm going to go to my Lutheran Seminary bookstore, which did hold the books for all the seminaries in St. Paul, including the Catholic Seminary. But I'm going to go to my Lutheran Seminary bookstore. I'm going to go to the family section. I'm going to see if there is a section on NFP, which I assume there never would be. And if there's a book written by somebody who's not a priest, because what does a celibate man know about family planning in my very arrogant mind, I will read it Well, lo and behold, I went to the Lutheran bookstore, and there was a shelf with a section about this big. There was a really big blue workbook that looked intimidating. And then there was this tiny little brown book called Human Ecology, A Physician's Guide to Planning Your Family by Dr. Robert Jackson. And I pulled that out and I opened it up and went, oh, now I got to read this. But my disbelief, I mean, again, like God is really working, right?
Yeah.
And I can see that in the moment, but I don't necessarily want to accept what he's saying to me. So I take it home and I read it. And he started with birth. He didn't start with how to plan your family. He started with how God created us, women, to give birth, and how the process is meant to be natural. And I was very much a natural granola kind of young adult. And that he gave us a natural way of feeding and nourishing our young. And then probably chapter 3 or 4, he got into, well, if he intended us to be able to give birth, he gave us a natural way of feeding our young that actually spaces births out.
Right. Many people don't know these things.
Right.
That's one of the amazing things about this whole topic is that in even our modern world, like people don't have the faintest clue how the body works. Yeah.
Right. That he must have also in his mind had a way to plan a family that's natural and respects the rhythms and cycles of a woman and a man's marital life. Yeah. So by the time I got to that chapter, I was completely disarmed. Like I was all in on natural family planning after reading that tiny little book. Thank you, Dr. Robert Jackson.
Yeah.
Because it just made so much sense to me. No chemicals, no barriers, no fussing around. We'll just work together and cooperate with God and each other on when it's time to welcome children in our life. And so I had to go and look for a class because I like to learn things. And we did find one and charted and learned a lot about how my body worked that I didn't know before.
Yeah.
It's very valuable in more than just the way of family planning. My classmates at the time, they were really pretty nice. I mean, I'm sure behind the scenes they were asking different questions. They were pretty kind to me, but I did sometimes get the kind of the ribbing of, well, why don't you talk to the Pope about world population? And I just said, well, I actually happen to agree with him now. I don't think I really need to have that conversation because he's right. And I had not read Humanae Vitae yet. That came a few years later. But when I did, I again was floored with how much it predicted where we would be right now if we were to allow artificial contraception into our lives. So my classmates didn't know what to do with that answer.
Yeah.
But I was also now aware that the pill can cause it's an abortifacient. And there were a lot of things that I just wasn't going to do because of that. And so at that point, I'm agreeing with the church on contraception. I'm starting to pray a rosary because Mary talked to me. So I felt like maybe I ought to honor her. And I was getting to know Bernadette, who was amazing to me because she didn't decompose. And that was something I had no concept of in Lutheranism.
Bernadette Subaru?
Yes.
Okay, yes.
Yes. I mean, why does God do that was a big question.
Yeah.
And the fact that he does that says something about who she is and what she's doing now in heaven for us, right? The other thing that really struck me about her was that she was somewhat simple. We don't really have modern language of it, maybe a learning disability. Couldn't learn her catechism enough for her first communion. But when the bishops were pushing on her to recant what she was saying, she was firm.
Yeah.
The lady said, I am the Immaculate Conception. And I couldn't put that aside. Like her witness, Our Lady of Lourdes, pray the rosary. I couldn't, that started to become something really normal to me, normal in my faith. And so I think Bernadette brought me into the church just as much as Our Lady of Lourdes did.
Yeah.
Because, like I said, there's no room for that in Lutheranism. So I have no contraception. I have Mary going on. And then I was going to Mass with Lincoln. It was my last year, right? And I was going to be a Lutheran pastor, and we were never going to be able to go to church together. It was not going to be realistic because he wasn't going to become Lutheran. He wrote his thesis on Lutheran Catholic dialogue and justification, but he was certain he wasn't going to be Lutheran. But he did really, I was so happy that he did take some time to really study my tradition. He's actually read more than I have now. He read all of my seminary books, more than I read them. But he wasn't going to be Lutheran, and I wasn't going to be Catholic. So he invited me to go to Mass with him. And I said, sure, let's do that this year while I still can. And we started going to St. Luke's Catholic Church. It was in his neighborhood in St. Paul. He was living with a couple of friends, and it's the Jesuit parish. It's St. Thomas More now, which is so fun because my son joined that parish in St. Paul. Nice. My son who's living there. But so we started to go, and at the time they had a church like underneath. They had downstairs church and upstairs church, and the downstairs church was really contemporary for the 90s. And it was what I'd been looking for. I love liturgy, as I've said before, but I was wanting liturgy where we sang more, not only just the hymns I'd grown up with, but more of the contemporary worship. But I didn't want what you get in the evangelical church. I still wanted our liturgy. Right. And I was so happy to find this Mass with guitars, with nuns who play guitars, with a zither, with Marty Hagen and some of those old 90s greats that some people don't like now. But at the time, it drew me into worship in a way that I hadn't ever been drawn in before. Yeah. And as I said, I was not going to communion anymore. I was just getting a blessing, but I felt included because I could do that part of it. Mm-hmm. And I just fell in love with the Mass. It also impressed me that Lutherans like their book and they like reading their stuff. And even though it's the same, it's really similar. Yeah. But Catholics were just praying the creed. They were just proclaiming the creed and not looking at their paper. And that was unusual for me. There was no guide, and I really, that struck me. I remember there were some baptisms one Sunday, and they had this big bowl that they used, and they blessed the water, and they dunked the babies in. That was a possibility for Lutherans, but I'd never seen it in a church. We were taught it, but I'd never seen it actually done. So that was really cool. And I just enjoyed that year of Mass. So you can see kind of the progression, right? Yep. As I'm now really wanting to go to Mass and not go to my Lutheran church. Well, one Sunday but I'm still a little mad because I can't go to communion. Mm-hmm. And we went to the Cathedral of St. Paul, beautiful church, and it reminded me of the first time I went in a Catholic church, and I looked up and couldn't believe the artwork. I was so struck. And the cathedral, you can hardly focus on Mass because there's so much to look at. But we went to the cathedral. I think it was probably a Sunday night, last chance Mass, as they joke about. And we went, and the homily was all about the Eucharist and coming to the table. And I don't remember the gospel, but it was very much an appeal to how everyone's welcome at this table. And it's a meal for everyone, and it's the source and summit, and it's our salvation. And I started to cry. I was so angry because I couldn't go, and so in pain because I couldn't go. And afterwards I told Lincoln, it's like, it's all great for him to say that, but I'm not welcome at that table. It's only for you guys, not everyone. And it wasn't until a lot later I realized that moment was the moment where I had to say, I will come into your church on your terms and not mine. Mm. And I didn't put it all together until until much later. But that was probably the pivotal point of me saying, oh my gosh, my heart is Catholic.
Yeah.
I was still agonizing, though, not wanting to leave my traditional community, having a congregation who was so excited.
Yeah.
They had a pastor coming out of their congregation. We did get married in our Lutheran church. The Archdiocese of Minneapolis-St. Paul has a Lutheran Catholic kind of document about how to make those marriages happen. So Lincoln got dispensation. We did our marriage prep through St. Luke's, and then we did the marriage up in my church where my parents were married. Yeah. But I knew that I wasn't going to necessarily give them the ordination they were hoping for, and it was saddening me. And again, that question, how do I use my gifts if I become Catholic? Mm-hmm. So there was a lot inside in tension. Yeah. And I wonder if I was difficult to be around at that time. I might have been, because I got nominated to give a sermon and lead a chapel service at my school, which the seniors did a vote to get to do that. So my parents came, and it went so well, but I did it on the Feast of St. Joseph, and I talked about St. Joseph, and I made it a whole St. Joseph theme, because you can kind of make your own stuff up if you're Lutheran to a certain extent. There's a formula you use. And that was probably another sign that maybe I'm not in the right church. And I still struggled with, do our actions through God's grace change us? I
was going to ask about that. Yeah, that's that topic that you'd mentioned wrestling with earlier. Yeah, at this point, had you come to see that differently? That theology it's a big theology question, but it has these practical implications for how we see our daily lives.
I was there by then. One of the reasons why I hadn't gone through the approval process is you had at the time, I don't know what they do now, had to promise to uphold the documents within the Book of Concord, which is kind of the Lutheran collection of the Lutheran confessional documents. Right. And I knew that I could do that, but there was and this. And so I couldn't, in good conscience, make that commitment without exploring that and this. So that was a piece of that year. And honestly, like Bernadette, again, her choices ultimately shaped who she is. Mm-hmm. And so we had Catholics, we have all these examples of people who grew in virtue. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't willing to settle that might just because they had practiced it a lot. Mm-hmm. Like, I honestly was thinking about how grace can build on our nature and grow us into something more like Christ. Right. I liked Wesley too for that same reason. Mm-hmm. He gets it kind of almost right, but yeah, I like him a lot for that same reason. That idea of moving towards perfection. I found it a lot more optimistic. I found Lutheranism to be by that point to be very depressing, because I can joyfully respond all I want, but I'm still going to be not enough. And not that we can work our way to heaven. I mean, I understand that difference, but to be able to understand that God is changing us. Yeah, but that's part of what seemed helpful. Yeah, that's part of what salvation means, is that that in the end, by grace, like I will be healed. Yes. Right. I'm not going to be eternity like I am now. Like, God forbid. Like, please heal me. Right. Yeah. Yeah. So, and we understand baptism the same way. Yeah. So it's just what it does and how grace builds on our baptism is understood differently. So it wasn't a huge leap. The leaps that I had to make were being made. And I was praying about it, and one morning I woke up, and I'd gone to bed still. Oh, am I going to let these people down? There's a clergy shortage. I love my Lutheran tradition, but I love my husband. I love the idea of being in the same church together. I believe most of what Catholicism's teaching. I'm still struggling a little with women's ordination, but you don't have to have it all figured out before you say yes to becoming Catholic. That I was pretty firmly resolved that was true. Like, you can allow God to continue to work in your life. You don't have to say yes to it all. You have to say yes to important things, right? Yeah. And I had to recognize that I wasn't in charge, which I think was more what this was about.
Right.
So I woke up though that morning, and it was in March, I want to say, and I just had a huge weight lifted off of me and a sense of peace. And I heard the Lord say, choose. I'll use your gifts wherever you choose. And that is my moment of recognizing that we have freedom. Mm-hmm. And the Lord wants us to freely choose him. And by then, my heart was already Catholic. I think I've illustrated that enough. You can see. Yeah. So, of course, I was going to choose to be Catholic. I did, the summer following my senior year, I did do one small internship up by my parents with a summer ministry just to make sure I could give up ordination, And about midsummer, we were newly married, and about midsummer, I thought, I can't do this. Like, I can't give myself to this ministry knowing that I want to be a mom and a wife and be a good one. And so when I could let that go, even as a Lutheran, I didn't want to have to give myself to that kind of ministry. That when I could let that go, then it was a no-brainer. So I told my parents that summer, and I asked Lincoln the other day, I was like, how did they respond? Because in my mind, they were a little hesitant, and they asked a few questions, but there wasn't a lot of dialogue about it. We were camping together, and we were around the fire, some of those moments at night where you're more vulnerable maybe than you are normally. And Lincoln said they were fine. They completely embraced it. And so I went into RCIA in the fall, and I still had a few classes to finish because I had taken some time. It reduced my load in the spring because we were planning our wedding and I was in so much turmoil. So I took a class. I took the Eucharist at St. Paul Seminary. I took ecumenism. I took a few classes. I took my history class at St. Paul Seminary. So I was cross-registering just so I could get some more theology behind what I was doing. Not that I'm by any means a systematician, but I had deeper questions than maybe the average RCIA candidate asked. Right. And then in the spring of 98, April 11th, I came into the church at Transfiguration in Oakdale, Minnesota. Wow. And it was, my dad surprised me. My mom couldn't come. Keep in mind, she's an organist. She's needed on Easter. Right. But my dad showed up. My sister was living in the cities and she got him there. And he wanted to come and he cried. He said, one church, one family. And that meant more to me. Just to know they were behind me, even though it meant telling and disappointing a lot of people. And I finished my degree, but I was Catholic 6 weeks before my graduation.
Wow. What an incredible journey, Jen.
Yeah. Yeah.
We've got about 6 minutes left, and I have so many follow-up questions I could ask you. But I think the two that I want to make sure that we get to before the end here is just one, again, one of the big issues for you is you had this sense of calling and you'd spent so much time and wrestled with it and worked through it, and you had to at least lay down a lot of that with an uncertainty about the future. Talk a little bit about that continued journey of that question of your gifts and how you've seen that. And then, and then how that is culminated in two places in your family life, but also in Spiritus. We want to hear about Spiritus Ministries. So, yeah.
Sure. Well, I had to find a job. One thing about Lutheran seminaries, you're guaranteed a job when you leave. Yeah. And when you leave your community behind, you don't have that anymore. Yeah. So I had to find a job with my Lutheran resume. I trotted around St. Paul looking for a youth ministry job. We were already expecting our first child, so I kind of had two whammies against me. No Catholic resume, no Catholic experience, and I was expecting a baby. But Holy Spirit and St. Paul took a risk on me, and I got a little youth ministry job for 10 hours a week. And Lincoln and he was working at Transfiguration at Oakdale, also doing youth ministry, and he finished his degree too. So, we welcomed our daughter into the fold, and she was baptized and at Transfiguration. And then in the summer of that year, because Lincoln didn't go to seminary, but he was from Cheyenne, the Diocese of Cheyenne, Wyoming, his Newman Center called him and said, I know you're not going to be a priest, but would you consider this position we have open as a pastoral associate? And I knew as soon as he got off the phone, we were going to Wyoming. And that's what happened. We were out there for 10 years. I did youth ministry for a little while. He was a pastoral associate. And then I took some time off. After we had baby number 3, we couldn't afford childcare. So it made more sense to stay home. And I was always part-time anyway. And then I enjoyed that. And then when our third one went into kindergarten, we just had our 4th. And we came back to the Midwest to Wisconsin, where I served as director of religious education and a principal simultaneously. Thanks. And got to use some administrative gifts that way. Yeah. But I think I felt like when it came to Spiritus 10 years ago, that's when God finally said, see, I have this for you. Because in training our missionaries to give witness talks, I really get to utilize those preaching skills that I had gained in school. I get to use administrative skills in helping them learn how to organize and managing people and managing the missionaries and what they're doing every day. I'm in charge of their schedule, and I'm a resource for them when they have questions. But I don't have to hire and fire, which I really like. It's like low risk administration. Yeah.
Well, just for those who aren't familiar with it, so Spiritus, I think you said like 16 young people a year, and you form them. Yep,
16 young adults. Yeah. We have a twofold mission to ignite the faith in youth and form leaders for the church. And beautiful. So I was brought on 10 years ago, was a new position to offer, to kind of more cohesively organize that formation piece. Yeah. And so my boss and we built a curriculum and have taken 10 years worth of missionaries through it now. And occasionally I get little winks from missionaries prior who will call me and say, can you help me with this? And I really appreciated this part of our formation, which is nice. Yeah. We have probably 75% of our alumni go on into ministry in some form. And we've had 23%, I think, pursue discerning religious life. I want to say we have 14 currently in religious life or priesthood. That's wonderful. Yeah, it is. It's kind of like the way that our daily life works out. I mean, they go to mass every day and they pray morning and evening prayer. They pray Angelus. They have a holy hour. They get spiritual direction once a month. So it's a little bit like religious life light. Yeah, or a little bit like seminary, right? Like it is. Intentionally forming these people for whatever mission and vocation God's called them. And then in the meantime, they inspire a lot of youth around Wisconsin to just come to know the Lord and love Him.
That's so wonderful. What a great mission, and what a great, God in His providence, bringing all those gifts and all the desires in your heart home to bear, both in your family as well as in this great ministry. It's just really wonderful. Well, again, just with a minute left here, if there's somebody in the audience, like let's just end with a word of encouragement. If there's somebody in the audience who's, and maybe in some of those places you were, in terms of maybe feeling this pull to the Catholic Church, but wrestling with some barriers, particularly barriers having to do with identity and with calling and mission, what's a word of encouragement you could give them?
I would say, like Peter, don't be afraid to step out of that boat. That you're going to sink at times, but the Lord will reach His hand out and rescue you. And it will work itself out. It might be a little painful in the process. It's not like it wasn't easy, but especially bumpy at the beginning, but it has been a beautiful journey.
Yeah. Amen. Well, thank you so much, Jen, sharing your story and for your work. We'll be praying for it. And thank you for being here for this episode of the Journey Home program. I pray that Jen's story is an inspiration to you. Again, as she said at the end there, that great reminder that, like St. Peter, we need to keep our eyes on Jesus, lest we sink under the waves, right? But keeping our eye on Jesus through the storms of life, trusting that, that He will bring us through it, and that what He has planned for us is better than we can imagine. There's always a little bit of a death there at times in our lives, right? We have to die to ourselves in order to be open for the great things that the Lord wants to give us. And so it takes perseverance. We've got to keep encouraging each other and praying for each other on that journey. But again, we'll be back here next week with another story to encourage you on the continuing journey. Let's keep praying for each other in the meantime. God bless.